We can start when you're ready. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. My dear participants, I'm extremely sorry for this delay. Actually, something was wrong with my laptop, which I had to shut down and start again. So we begin today, and I hope you have received the handout for today's session. This comprises of three things: the verse of the Qur'an, some verses of the Qur'an, then we have Hadith from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and finally a couple of verses from the Bible. So we'll start off with the Quranic verse, and this is one of the very frequently read verses amongst Muslims as it relates to character building and the traits which the Quran intends to produce in our personalities. And these are actually three verses from Surah Furqan, and let me read out the Arabic and the translation of these verses so that you can have an idea of what we're going to discuss today. So the verse goes like this: وَعِبَادُ الرَّحْمَنِ الَّذِينَ يَمْشُونَ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ هَوْنًا وَإِذَا خَاطَبَهُمُ الْجَاهِلُونَ قَالُوا سَلَامًا وَالَّذِينَ يَبِيتُونَ لِرَبِّهِمْ سُجَّدًا وَقِيَامًا وَالَّذِينَ يَقُولُونَ رَبَّنَا اصْرِفْ عَنَّا عَذَابَ جَهَنَّمَ إِنَّ عَذَابَهَا كَانَ غَرَامًا. A translation of these verses is: and the servants of the merciful are those who walk humbly on the earth, and when people overcome with frenzy converse with them, they say peace. And they are those who spend their nights before their Lord, prostrating and standing, and are ones who keep praying, our Lord, protect us from the punishment of hell. Indeed, its punishment is ever clinging. So these verses of the Quran actually, as you can see, spell out certain traits, certain habits of righteous people, of people who are God-fearing, of people who are God-conscious. And the first thing you notice in these words is the expression Ibadur Rahman. Now, Ibadur Rahman actually would mean servants of the merciful God, which of course means people who worship the most merciful God, who follow the directives of the most merciful God, and who are subservient to what the most merciful God tells them. And then we have a sequence of abilities and qualities which are spelled out by the Quran. The first thing which you can see which is stated here is Yamshuna alal ardi hauna. This means that they walk humbly on earth. They do not walk as if they were arrogant people. I'm sure you would understand this fact that the way we walk has somewhat of a bearing on our own character. If we walk in a very upright and straight manner and with our chest butting out, we give the impression of rogues and ruffians. However, if we walk in a manner in which a person can say that this is a humble walk, this is a walk of a person who fears God, then of course that is what is implied here. So the first quality of the Ibadur Rahman, or the people of the Almighty, or the servants of the Almighty, is that they are humble in their gait. And when this is said, actually it gives us the clue to the whole personality of a person. A person who will walk humbly on earth is someone who will be humble in his life as well. He'll be humble in his conversation, he'll be humble in his clothes, he'll be humble in his conduct. So humility is something which is, I would say, one of the most cherished and one of the most sought after abilities that we servants of God should have. You see, when we acknowledge the Almighty, and when we think that we are bending down before a superior being, we are only acknowledging what the truth is. And humility is this acknowledgement. This humility has to reflect in our actions. And as the verse says, that the foremost thing that you notice of a person is the way he walks. So the way a person walks should be not in a manner that he walks as if the people like ruffians and rogues and arrogant people walk on earth, but his gait, his walking style should have a ring of humility in it, because such a person will then also be a person in which you will find that his overall personality is down to earth. His overall personality is one in which you cannot detect any arrogance, you cannot detect any haughtiness or rebelliousness. He's a person who acknowledges the Almighty, and when you acknowledge the Almighty, this is our true worth, our true standing, that we are obedient and we are humble servants of the Almighty, and we are the power we have, the personality that we have, the good things that we have, all have been bestowed upon us by the Almighty, and they are entrusted to us, and they can be taken away in a matter of time, and we will be left wondering. So we need to understand that all that we have that might make us arrogant, that might make us lose our humility, is blessing of God, and it's only in the fitness of things to always acknowledge this blessing and to remain humble. And one of the ways I always suggest my students and my colleagues and even to my own self is one lesson in humility is that we should be the first people to greet other people. We should not wait for the other person to greet us. We should be the first people to greet whenever we meet each other. And of course, going with that, we should be people who should shake hands with the other people, and instead of waiting for the other people to stick out the hand, we should stick our hand in as the initiative, as in the foremost way. And another thing is that this greeting the other person should be notwithstanding his status in the society. He could belong to our junior generation, the younger generation. He could be our subordinate. He could be our person working for us. Whoever that we meet, as soon as we meet him or her, our greeting to that person should be offered as soon as we realize that we are meeting someone, without waiting for the other person. This is a lesson, I would say, in humility, and one of the ways, of course, which can produce humility in us. Humility is an inborn trait. It is something that we already have. The only thing is that we need to polish it at times. Now, the other thing that the verse talks about is إِذَا خَاطَبَهُمُ الْجَاهِلُونَ قَالُوا سَلَامًا. That when let me first explain the word jahil. In Arabic, jahil is not simply the person who is ignorant. That is one of the uses of or meanings of jahil in Arabic. Another meaning of jahil or jahal in Arabic is a person who is overcome with frenzy, who is overwhelmed with frenzy, and he loses his calm. He gets angry, he gets emotional very much. So a jahil in Arabic is not merely a person who is ignorant. That is one of the meanings, but here that meaning is not implied. Here the meaning which is implied is a person who is overcome with frenzy, a person who is overcome with emotions whenever he is faced by another person. So what the verse is telling us is that the Ibadur Rahman, or the people of Rahman, the servants of Rahman, they don't get entangled when they are faced with a person who is overcome with frenzy. Instead of entangling with him, instead of involving themselves with him, because whenever such a person comes our way, we tend to get emotional ourselves as well. And the Almighty has actually given us this lead, that whenever you face someone who is overcome with emotions and frenzy, you don't need to extend the argument, you don't need to go on conversing with him. Just say salam and withdraw from that person, because that argument is not going to lead you anywhere. Argument with people who are overcome with frenzy is never going to solve the problem. It will only complicate matters. So therefore what we are asked is that we should withdraw from people who are overcome with frenzy, and this should not be taken as a defeat by any means, because you see, when you are talking to someone who is not in the mood for the exchange or the argument, the whole argument is bound to get heated. And so therefore, if we also start replying to the other person in the same vein, in the same mood, in the same tone, we can well imagine what this conversation would lead us to. So at the very first step, at the very initial step, the Quran has advised us that whenever you get into a heated debate, into an argument with someone who is overcome with frenzy, just say salam and withdraw with him, because that is not the right time to engage in argument. That's not the right moment to continue the argument. It is best to stop the argument and let that person cool down and imagine what exactly should be done at that time. Now, the other attributes which are also mentioned here are of course something which all of us may cherish, and that is وَالَّذِينَ يَبِيتُونَ لِرَبِّهِمْ سُجَّدًا وَقِيَامًا. That the people or the servants of Rahman are those who spend their nights in prostration, and they spend their nights while standing before the Almighty. Now, this is a very common style of the Quran. Instead of saying that they are prostrating and standing in prayer, parts of the prayer, components of the prayer are highlighted, and the purpose is to highlight the prayer itself by highlighting some components of it. So when it is said that they are prostrating and they are standing, it's not that they are prostrating and standing without any reason, but the fact the sajda and the qiyam which is referred to here is actually the sajda and qiyam which one does when we are offering the prayer. So when it is said وَالَّذِينَ يَبِيتُونَ لِرَبِّهِمْ سُجَّدًا وَقِيَامًا, it actually means that the people of the servants of the merciful are those who spend their nights while prostrating and standing in prayer before the Almighty. And of course this prayer is a special prayer, which is the tahajjud prayer, which is referred to here. And amongst all the nafil prayers, amongst all the optional prayers, it occupies the highest status, it occupies the highest rank. And in these days of Ramadan, when we are all getting up at the time of Sehri, we are given this God-sent opportunity to pray the tahajjud prayer. So therefore we need to realize that we are in these nights being given this opportunity every day to pray the tahajjud when we are eating Sehri. Now as far as the tahajjud prayer is concerned, we must understand that this is a prayer in which we break our sleep and then we get up, and therefore the Almighty values our sacrifice of sleep very much. And this is a time in which we know from a hadith in which the Almighty turns his attention towards his people a lot. And a hadith says that the Almighty actually asks us that, is there anyone who can ask for something that I could give him, or is there anyone who could ask for forgiveness so that I could forgive him? So this is a very blessed time, and if we are overcome with problems, if we have any emotional stress, if we have any financial stress or stress because of our health, and we'd like to pray to the Almighty, of course praying to Him all the time after any of our prayers is good. But the best time to pray, the best time to talk to the Almighty is the tahajjud time, is the time in which we can converse with God when no one is around us, when no one is awake perhaps, and we are able to present our petition, we are able to present our case to the Almighty. So this is another feature of the people who are actually the Ibadur Rahman mentioned in this Quranic verse of Surah Furqan. And the next and the final thing which this verse mentions is that وَالَّذِينَ يَقُولُونَ رَبَّنَا اصْرِفْ عَنَّا عَذَابَ جَهَنَّمَ إِنَّ عَذَابَهَا كَانَ غَرَامًا. And these are the people who pray that, O Lord, protect us from the hell, because the hellfire is something which keeps clinging, which of course means that when Nauzubillah, people are cast into hell, they'll not leave the hellfire or the abode of hell unless of course in certain circumstances, but in most circumstances these people will be abiding in hell. So their prayer is Rabbana asrif anna azaba jahannam, oh God, turn away from us this hell, this punishment of hell, because all of us of course would like to have the affection of the Almighty, we'd like to have the mercy of the Almighty. And these are the people who pray that in spite of doing good deeds, in spite of doing a lot of good work, we still don't know that we might be doing something bad, we might be doing something which crosses the limits, and therefore we are always acknowledging that we might be doing something wrong. So therefore we pray that Almighty, please forgive us, please show your mercy on us, because we are very weak. So these are some of the qualities which these verses of Surah Furqan mention. And I advise you, my dear participants and viewers, that if whenever you have the time, please look up these verses in the Quran, because further down and further ahead, or right ahead these verses, you will find some other qualities of the Ibadur Rahman which are mentioned. Because our topic today is humility, so we have concentrated specifically on parts of that whole chunk of verses which relates to humility. Otherwise, my advice to you would be that please look up these exhilarating verses of Surah Furqan, and in fact there are about 7 or 8 or 9 of them which follow this sequence, and when you read them, you'll find that your own soul is nourished by what is said in these verses, because they are so close to how we feel for the Almighty and our own spirituality. Let us now move on to the next part of our session, and that is the Hadith verse or the Hadith of the day. And I have actually.
1 second, I'm very sorry. The sound quality is not that good. You're going in and out.
Is it okay now? I have pressed the button a little more. Is it okay now? Can you hear me now? Okay. So, hadith of the day relates to a very famous hadith which is found in the Sahih of Imam Muslim, and actually it relates to the knowledge of virtue and vice. So let me read out the text and the translation of the verse before you, before we discuss it. It is narrated by Nawas bin Sam'an al-Ansari. He says, قال سألت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم عن البر والإثم فقال البر حسن الخلق والإثم ما هاك في صدرك وكرهت أن يطلع عليه الناس. So a translation is that Nawas ibn Sam'an al-Ansari, he is a famous companion of the Prophet, he said, I asked God's messenger about virtue and vice, what is good and evil, what is piety, and what is virtue and what is vice. So the reply of the Prophet was that virtue is good conduct, husnul khuluq, and what is evil? Vice is something which pinches your heart and you would not like people to know about it. So this particular hadith of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is actually an explanation of the Quranic verse which says فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا, which means that the innate knowledge of right and wrong is innately ingrained in human beings. They don't need to go and find out what right and wrong is, because the awareness and the cognizance and the comprehension of what right and wrong is actually ingrained in our own human nature. So we do not require any external person to tell us what right and what wrong is. You can see from the words of the Prophet, as they have been reported, that the first thing that he has said is that al-bir is husnul khuluq. When he says that what is virtue, he says that the answer that he gives is that it's good conduct. So good conduct, of course, is a very comprehensive and a concise word at the same time. It concisely and comprehensively conveys us that if you want to be a person who is virtuous, if you want to be a person who is good, then you need to understand that you have to be a person who is morally upright, who morally upholds all the human values, all universal values. So he is a person who is just, he is a person who speaks the truth, a person who is honest, a person who is selfless, a person who is humble, a person who is sympathetic towards others, a person who is charitable, a person who has his linkages with the Almighty, with his parents, with his siblings, with his children, the way they have been told us. So in one word, the Prophet Muhammad has actually summed up the whole concept of virtue, and that is to have good manners, to be a person who is a good human being, to be a person who will be remembered as a good human being. The second part of the hadith actually tells us what vice is. The other part of virtue, of course, the opposite of virtue is vice. So it tells us what vice is, and that is something which pinches your heart, something in which you yourself think that what you are, what you have in your mind or what you have in your heart is an indication that whatever you have done is not right, or whatever you have heard is not right, or whatever you have seen is not right. So it's like an internal barometer, it's like an internal scale in yourself which tells you what right and wrong is. And we can further say that primarily it is our conscience which tells us what right and wrong is. We don't need any external identification, and whenever we do a wrong, it pinches our heart. And the other standard which the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is pointed out here is وَكَرِهْتَ أَن يَطَّلِعَ عَلَيْهِ النَّاسِ, which means that you would not like your evil to be disclosed to other people. Now that's the second litmus test in this regard, that you would not like your bad deed to be disclosed. Of course, all of us would like our good deeds to be disclosed. We don't feel any compunction about those, but we would never, if our own conscience is living, we would never like our evil deeds, we would never like our bad deeds that people come to know of them. So the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in fact has given us two standards of vice. One, our own heart tells us, our own heart pinches when we do something wrong. And the other thing is that we would not like to disclose it to other people. So by these two litmus tests, we can clearly see what right and what wrong is. And hence this also tells us that the knowledge of vice and virtue, the knowledge of good and evil is inbuilt in us. We do not know, we do not need to go to any other person to find out what right and wrong is. It is found in our own selves. Now, viewers, let us come to the Bible verse of the day, and this verse has been taken from the Gospel of Matthew, and it says, it's chapter number 6, verses 1 and 2 of this chapter, and I've entitled it "Showing Off Generosity." So it says, right, what do you want me to do? Is it something wrong? I should do what? I should share my screen. Okay. Okay. Is it showing now? Show screen. You can see it now? Okay. So the third part of our discussion today leads us to the Bible verse, and that is, as I said, a verse from chapter number 6. These are two verses, in fact, from chapter number 6 of the Gospel of St. Matthew. It says, "Take care not to do your good works before men, to be seen by them, or you will have no reward from your Father in heaven." Father in heaven, of course, is a metaphor for the Almighty. When you give money to the poor, do not make a noise about it, as the false-hearted men do in the synagogues and in the streets, so that they may have glory from men. Truly I say to you, they have their reward. I think these verses are also self-explanatory, and they clearly tell us that when we are generous to other people, in fact, generosity is a representative of all the good that we do, of all the good works that we do. So the Bible verse actually tells us, this particular verse, that we must not flaunt, we must not show off our generosity to other people. We have to hide our good deeds, let them remain between us and the Almighty, because if He knows what we have done, it will be of immense spiritual advancement as far as we are concerned. Of course, when we want to teach our children, or maybe when we want to encourage our children, we at times do certain good deeds in front of them so that they get motivated. Now that's an exception, that's not being talked about here. Here we are specifically dealing with a subject in which a person feels a lot of elevation, a lot of what you can say, that he would like to flaunt his generosity and his good deeds. He wants to show off and be pompous that I have done such and such a good deed. And in the times of Jesus, as you might all know, this was something which was miserably done and shamelessly done by certain people, especially the Jews. And you can see Jesus is actually referred to the synagogues, which is the place of worship of the Jews, and their religious people were guilty of showing off their prayers, their charity, every act that they would do, so that they could earn some praise from the masses and the people around them. So in our own religion as well, in the religion of proper by Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam as well, which is of course very close to what Jesus has brought, we have been given the same directive that we must not show off when we are doing good deeds. And it's like actually doing away with our good deeds when we show off, because we need to understand that all good deeds have to be done with the pure intention that we are doing it fairly and squarely for the Almighty. We are not doing it for anyone except the Almighty. Let no one know what we are doing good. If we are doing an act of virtue, let it be between us and our God. If we are doing something for the cause of the common masses, let it be between us and ourselves and our God, except when we want to encourage our children, or maybe there could be some other exceptions. But as I said, exceptions do not make the rule. And in such cases, we need to understand that all such virtues, their utility is only gained if they remain a secret. If we discuss our virtues in public, if we show off our generosity and other good works in public, then the good that they should have for our own spiritual advancement and our own spiritual enlightenment will not be accomplished, because the reward that we want from the Almighty, we'll start getting it in the form of praise from our brethren, and this will of course increase our ego, because when we get this praise from our people around us, we always like this praise. And here we have been cautioned that to be pompous, to show off our good deeds is not at all something which is recommended. So I now come to the end of this session, and we can now have some questions, and later I'll go on with the next part of our session. But just to recap, that we have studied a Quranic verse regarding humility and the traits of the believers, and as I said, it will be really good if you could look up this verse and the rest of the set of verses which follow it, because they also give us some very sound guidance regarding human conduct and character. Then we studied a hadith regarding what good and evil is, and we saw that good and evil is something which is whose awareness is found in our own selves. And the final thing that we studied was the fact that whenever we do a good deed, it's all the more better if we hide that good deed, and it should remain between us and the Almighty. So this is a brief summary of what we have discussed and studied today. So the house is now open for questions. Right, so
non-Muslims follow their faith very diligently, and we, a lot of our Muslim brothers, sisters tend to call them prophets. They haven't had a chance to study the Quran, so how is Allah going to judge them? Question is about what you mentioned about charity. I'm also involved in trying to raise funds for a lot of good organizations or good hospitals like Indus Hospital in Karachi. So don't you think that we have to mention it to people to encourage them to give this money for this good cause? And sorry, my last question is, why did it take Allah 23 years to abolish slavery? Sorry for so many questions, but if you could kindly answer all three of them. Thank you.
Okay, as far as the first question is concerned, in fact, I'm just going to describe this later on in detail, because the misconception that I was about to discuss today relates to the issue that you have just raised in your first question, so that I defer that. As far as the issue of charity is concerned, and the one which you have asked about slavery. So I'll take up the question regarding slavery first, and also advise you to please look up some of my previous talks which I have given here, and we've discussed this issue of slavery in detail, not only in the talks but also in a number of writings that have been authored by our scholars here at Al-Mawrid. But in a very, very brief way, in a very passing way, let me just give you a few minute insight on the issue of slavery, and that is that the reason that it was slowly and gradually abolished was that it was deeply ingrained in the Arab society of those times. It was part and parcel of the Arab society. Each and every house had slave men and slave women, and the moral situation of the slave women was very bad, and if they had been freed at once, they would have become prostitutes in the society and would have caused more nuisance than they were already doing. And as far as men were concerned, they had no skill to do any work, and if they had been released with a single command, there was all the possibility that they would resort to beggary and become an economic burden on the society. So because of this deeply ingrained tradition of Arab culture, which was hundreds of years old, in which every single household had many slaves, which were like their own home, they had become part of their home. So it needed a very gradual strategy. So that is why in the plane of the Almighty, this gradual strategy was adopted. You see, the Almighty, when He prohibits something, He always keeps into mind the human plane, the plane in which we humans are accustomed to. If He does something or stops something, He always does so by using wisdom. If you remember that hadith from Aisha Radhiyallahu anha, and she said that had the directive of fornication and prohibition of liquor been revealed very early in Mecca, people would never have given it up, because they were so used to drinking liquor and the other excesses that they were committing. So this wisdom in the implementation of the Sharia is the basic cause because of which it can be said that a gradual strategy was adopted. I'm sorry, I forgot the question about charity. What was the second question?
You might, if you like, everyone.
The second question on charity is that I am.
I'm not being able to hear you.
What she was saying was, I think we lost audio. What she was saying was that you said not to mention any good deed that you do.
Okay.
She's raised
Right.
money for good charities.
Right. So I said that there is always an exception, and that exception, you know from your own heart that when you want to encourage other people, it could be your surrounding, it could be your children. Of course, at times you need to mention your good work so that people get encouraged, but that is an exception. However, other than that, all of us in our own hearts, we very well know when we are showing off and when we are actually trying to educate people. There is a fine line between instructing and educating people and between showing off. Our own personal conscience tells us when we are showing off. So I think we should trust our conscience in this regard. And as I already said, that educating and instructing people in charities is always an exception, but it has to be treated as an exception, and therefore it's not the rule.
Any other questions? Kindly click on raise hand and I'll open your mic. I have no other questions.
Okay. So let us begin with the next part of our session today, and that actually relates to a common misconception which we confront or which we face every now and then, and that is the meaning of the word kafir, the way it is mentioned in the Qur'an, and therefore some of the harsh verses of the Qur'an that we find mentioned there actually are addressed to the kuffar. Kuffar is the plural of kafir, and the word kafir can be translated generally as disbelievers, as a disbeliever, and kuffar, of course, is the plural of kafir. The other plurals are kafirun in the nominative, and in the accusative they are kafirin, also in the genitive. So these are just the variations of the word, otherwise they have the same general meaning. Now the first thing that we need to understand is that in most cases in which we are confronted with these verses, we need to first understand that the word kafir is not generally used in the Quran, which is synonymous to all Christians and all Jews or other denominations which are not Muslims. The word kafir is generally used in the Quran for a person who has intentionally, deliberately denied the truth which has been exposed, which has been unveiled to it by no other person than a messenger of God himself. And as you know, in the terminology of the Quran, this is called conclusive argument or itmamul hujjah. So unless the truth has been communicated to a person and he is convinced of the truth, and in spite of being convinced of the truth, he still does not accept it out of haughtiness, out of arrogance, out of any other reason, now that person can be labeled as a person who is a kafir. Now since kufr or disbelief is something which actually relates to a person's inner feelings and inner sentiments and inner beliefs as well, because when a person denies outwardly, he denies the Almighty, he could deny the Prophet, he could deny the basic truths, common Muslims may not always know the reason for that. It could be because of ignorance, it could be because our own Muslims behave in a manner in which non-Muslims are drawn away from them. It could be simply because of a lack of information. So a person today who is living today, he cannot be classified as a kafir at all, because the fact is that a person, when he disbelieves from his heart, this knowledge of disbelief from the heart only rests with the Almighty. Only the Almighty can pinpoint who people are who have deliberately denied the truth. Now the only difference is that in the times of the messengers of God, this was pinpointed by the Almighty through wahi, through divine revelation, and communicated to his messengers. So they knew, even a messenger does not have this knowledge that a person is a kafir or he has intentionally denied the truth unless he is told by the Almighty himself. So we need to understand that we human beings cannot know if a person has intentionally denied the truth, and only if a person has intentionally denied the truth can he be called a kafir. Now that knowledge rests with the Almighty alone, because only He has the knowledge of what is in the hearts. In the times of the messengers of God, He tells us who these people are, because He wants to create a contest between good and evil and sift out good from evil and punish evil and reward good, so that this exercise can actually become an argument in favor of that greater day of judgment which is going to take place one day. So therefore we need to understand that today we cannot call any person a kafir simply because we just don't know if he has intentionally denied, and also we are not messengers of God who have conveyed the truth. Because to become a kafir, you have to deliver, it is only the messenger of God who has to deliver the truth and clarify what the truth is, number one. And number two, it is the Almighty who tells us whether a person after this delivery of the truth has intentionally denied or not. So these two steps are essential as far as declaring someone as a kafir is concerned. And these two steps, as you can see by their own statement, that they can only be upheld by the Almighty Himself. Hence today no single person can be called a kafir, and it's as simple as that. All people who we come across who are not Muslims, they have to be called as non-Muslims, and that is all. And all the verses of the Qur'an which relate to kuffar, all the harsh verses of the Qur'an actually relate to the kuffar of the time of the Almighty, of the prophets of God, and the last time that they were applicable was in the time of the Prophet Muhammad, because he was the person, last messenger of God, who actually delineated the truth in its ultimate form. And then people who still denied it out of arrogance, in spite of accepting it in their hearts, they were punished by the Almighty and labeled as kafir. So we need to understand that all those verses of the Quran which relate to that intentional denial of a prophet are actually directly relating to the people of the book of the times of the Prophet of God. The second thing that I'd like to clarify here is that people are very confused as to why we cannot call Christians as mushrik, because they believe that Jesus is the Son of God. Now, if He's the Son of God, then why should we not call the people of the book, especially the Christians, as mushrik? Because they uphold something which is very, very close to shirk. In fact, it is shirk, because they say that Jesus is the Son of God. Now, the answer to this is that a person becomes a mushrik only when he himself admits to polytheism. The mushrikun of the Arabs, they admitted to polytheism, and they said, yes, we do believe in several gods, and therefore the Quran labeled them as polytheists or mushrikun. This was never the case with Christians. Although they were inflicted with very blatant forms of shirk, but they never ever accepted that they are mushrik. And that is why the Quran has never called, you will be surprised to note this, that not in one place in the Quran are the Christians called as mushrik. There is not a single place. So we need to understand that is because they, in spite of being guilty of certain forms of shirk, they are basically monotheists. They are basically proponents of Tawheed. We can say they are deviants from the creed of Tawheed, but they are not mushriks, because they do not, they say that Trinity or Jesus being the Son of God is actually a manifestation of Tawheed. They try to actually interpret it in a specific manner to which we don't agree. But unless and until they themselves submit to polytheism, we cannot call them as polytheists. And that is the reason that in the whole corpus of the Quran, as I said, they have never been named as polytheists. We know that the people of the book, especially the Christians, as I said, have these certain areas in which we have this gray area, or even this blatant area in which we think that they are doing shirk. But the Quran has never ever said that they are mushrik, and this is something very important that we must note. So with these few points of explanation, which I may summarize at the end, firstly, we need to understand that today's non-Muslims cannot be called as kafir. They are not kafir. They are simply non-Muslims. Kafir is a person who becomes a kafir, or a person becomes a kafir when he intentionally denies the truth, when he deliberately denies the truth which is unveiled to him by no other personality than a messenger of God himself. And since we don't have any such facility today, we have no right to call any person a kafir. And secondly, as I explained, that the word that mushrik cannot be used for Christians. Although they are incriminated by some blatant forms of shirk, however, they do not admit to shirk. So unless they themselves admit to shirk, we cannot call them as mushrik or polytheists. We can just call them as non-Muslims or deviant proponents of monotheism. Just as people who hold Tawheed and monotheism very dear to them, but in spite of that, they go to graves and the tombs of saints and they pray before them. So just as a Muslim who goes to the grave of a saint and prays before them, we don't call him a mushrik. All we say is that he has become a deviant practicer of Tawheed. That is all what has happened with Christians as well. So with these few words of explanation and with this very important notion that we must understand that who a non-Muslim is, who a mushrik is, who a kafir is, I come to the end of this talk. And if in case you need some more explanation, I'll be very happy to furnish it. Thank you. Right. And your question was relating to charity? Right. No. So I said that that's an exception. Whenever you want to encourage people, whenever you want other people to follow your ways, that's always an exception. And the best way to know what an exception is, that you can clearly know it from your heart. Whenever you are showing off, that tells you from your heart. So there is a line between showing off because of charity and showing off just to encourage and educate people. If you want to encourage people, if you want to educate people, and you want to tell them that they should also follow you or other people in good deeds, in a very subtle and a simple way, of course, you can tell them. But there is a line between showing off and between educating other people. So as soon as you cross that line, you should stop. And the time that you cross that line is best told to you by your own conscience.
If anyone else has a question, please click on the raise hand. Sir, these are all the questions we had
Okay.
today. I do not have any other questions, so
Right.
If you're okay with ending the class, literally could have it.
Yes, I just wanted to make it clear that perhaps next week would be Eid in all probability.
More than likely that's the case, so I think it will probably be okay to cancel the class. Most likely I don't have a class scheduled for the next week, but even if there is, I'll go ahead and cancel it and I'll send an email to everyone
Okay.
that there is no class.
Okay, that's fine.
Eid Mubarak in advance from us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.